Hello and welcome to the Radiate Wellness podcast with your host, metaphysician, Reiki master, and hypnotherapist, Christy Clemens Hoffman. Each week, we will discover teachings, tips, and tools to radiate your best life ever with practitioners, authors, and luminaries to help you on your path. Wellness, joy, peace, abundance. What do you want to radiate?
Hello and welcome back to the Radiate Wellness podcast. Today I am visited by Amrit Sandhu from Melbourne, Australia, who is an international speaker, a spiritually aligned living and purpose coach, host and founder of the Australian-based podcast, Inspired Evolution. He's had a profound transformation along his journey, which he's now sharing with others and guiding them in their own transformations. Thank you so much for joining me today, Amrit.
Oh my God, Christy, it is such a pleasure to be here. Big fan of all the work you're doing with Radiate Wellness, and it's a real treat for me. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. It took us a while to get together. All kinds of delays and mishaps along the way. So this is perfect timing and perfect alignment. So I'm
all in divine timing, and the stars had to align. Here we are.
And here we are. So you are a living and purpose coach. What is a living and purpose coach, and why would we want to know about this?
Yeah, so I think generally what's going on at large in the world at the moment is there is a bit of a crisis of purpose at the moment. And underneath that, there's also this harrowing stat that sort of drives me, which is 1 in 2 people, and we're trending towards 2025, are anxious or depressed. And I know it's not the case for everybody, but from my felt experience, from my lived experience, the places where I was most challenged by depression, I found had a direct correlation to me feeling off purpose. Now, for the longest while, so for me, mental health and purpose are deeply interwoven. And I always like to just throw in a quick little asterisk there, because there are definitely people that have chemical imbalances in their brain, and it's not just about being in alignment to the reason you were put here in life, not being in alignment to your soul's direction. That's causing you depression. Maybe there is something going on with your serotonin levels and stuff like that. And maybe you're meant to take medication. But I think we're not all, 50% of us are not meant to be walking around on medication. I think that bit's kind of clear as well in this conversation as well, to sort of come off the asterisk touchwood a little bit. And so, in there I found just as a young man growing up, when I was aligned to my purpose, and when I am aligned to my purpose, I'm a brimming, vibing, vibrant version of myself. And therein lies this linguistically, it's quite simplistic, but when you start living it out, it becomes quite profound. This awareness that, depression is like you being suppressed. It's a suppression, as opposed to you being able to authentically express, which is the opposite of the depression and the suppression. So if you can authentically express who you are, you can be creative, you can flow, life works better, it moves more. So in that space, that's kind of the awareness that I'm carrying, touchwood, through my experience and my challenges that I've experienced in life. And that's what's brought me to the work that I do ultimately. And it just comes to the point where we can talk more about purpose. You just become so passionate about something because it's helped you shift and change so much that you end up sharing it with the world. I see that time and time again in all of my clients. It's like, let's cultivate something that matters to you. And then as that naturally happens, your cup will overflow and you end up sharing it with the world like we're doing here today. But that's a little bit around purpose and the felt sense around purpose coaching and why it's so important to me. I struggled with 6 years of depression, which brought me to mindfulness and meditation. And even with that level of self-awareness, after that, I struggled with 7.5 years of career misalignment. And that was really challenging. And we can describe how to align as well. And I'm sure we'll get to that in the podcast. But that was the other challenge. And so that to sort of say, then we talk about spiritually aligned living, and the question sort of comes up to, what is alignment? What are you aligning to? And so there's this awareness, having been on the podcast, running my own podcast for 7 years now. And you hear the spiritual masters, they all say the same thing with different words. Some call it higher self, lower self. Some call it spirits, personality. Some call it great spirit and ego. There's different terms for it. The common one that I find myself sharing, I like spirit and personality, but generally people like soul and personality. That seems to work pretty well for them. You've got your soul and you've got your personality, but your personality is working away at trying to be somebody, but generally in that it's hijacked from being who it authentically, truly wants to be and is. And all these societal factors, familial factors, environmental factors play into the personality, end up being not its true self. And then the spiritually aligned living is like, hey, what was your soul's purpose for incarnating into this time? And can we have a look at that and align your personality back to that? And that's actually where you find the most amount of ease, the most amount of flow. And so that is also, dis-ease. And that goes back to the conversation around my mental health fascinations, experiences as well, around purpose being supportive for mental health. And so the message in my heart is that health is purpose and purpose is health from a mental health lens. And for the longest time, just to round out the conversation, I felt like I was just this, I thought that message in my heart was like something that I was championing and carrying on my own, But it turns out the whole science in India of Ayurveda, like the whole science, which of Ayurveda, I'm sure most of your listeners know about it, but it is the sister science to yoga. It's kind of what yoga lives in. In its heart, like the whole reason this science of health exists is actually to facilitate your dharma so that you can live the reason you're here to live out to your fullest capacity. So it's an age-old conversation, and it's an absolute honor to be carrying this message. But yeah, touch wood, that's really what's going on in there. Your health is your purpose is your health. Can we align to our soul's greatest purpose?
I love that. Now, you came to this work through a personal transformation. Is that something that you can share with us?
Yeah, sure. So there's been two, you can call them dark nights of the soul, existential crises that I've experienced. One of the big ones being, like I mentioned earlier, struggling with depression for 6 years. And that led me to, when I share that share about, that sort of experience, I say meditation and mindfulness actually reconstituted my life, because it was almost like I was dehydrated spiritually at that point. Like it was just, it was a really tough time. And for those that know what depression feels like, you don't wish it upon your worst enemy. It's a tough place to be, and to spend such a lengthy period of time in that state was, and then through mindfulness and meditation, my life turned around completely. But speaking to the transformation specifically tailored towards purpose, with that level of awareness, I carried on forward into, just to give you an insight, when I was struggling with depression, one of the things that really hit me, that highlighted that, hey, like something's wrong. My whole life up until that point, I'd been like academically quite touchwood sound, and being diagnosed, I didn't just voluntarily just go, oh yeah, I'm just going to go see the psychologist and psychiatrist. I'm going to go get diagnosed with depression. It was, my whole world came crashing down around me at the time. And one of the largest symptoms was the university that I was in was actually like, we need you to leave. I was like, need me to leave? And they're like, yeah, look, you're just not performing. And I was just like, wow. And that was a real because up until that point, it was just like, surely, everybody is living a certain way and things may not be working out at times, but that was quite a harrowing wake-up call for me. But then also, so much of my identity at the time, my personality was built upon being academic, being intelligent, being all this sort of stuff. And my friends, family and all that expected something of me. And that was quite the pulling of the thread that sort of pulled the carpet out from underneath me. And so I share that because, having then gotten support, and we can talk more about that if we need to, but gone and got support, come home to mindfulness meditation. I was prescribed antidepressants, but did take them, but then ended up coming off them. And one of the key things I found was mindfulness meditation helped me build a great level of self-awareness. And even with that self-awareness, I then went back to university. And then when I graduated university 2.5, 3 years later, the guy that got kicked out of university then graduated 3 years later out of university, not just, what I studied was structural engineering, not just top of structural engineering in his little cohort of 200, 300 students, but then top of engineering around 1,000, 1,500 students, but then also top of the school. So that was really amazing. For that university in the year, I got awarded this kind of what we call the Ducks, but this incredible award, very prestigious award for being academically gifted, touch wood, at university. And there was a series of interviews, and I don't say this to sort of gloat at hey, check out how gifted I am. It's really, the reason I share this is because there was a series of interviews leading into, they had a great bunch of candidates to receive this award. And one of the things we found was, in the interview process, they asked me, and I remember this being one of the final questions, which was like, why should we give this award to you? And I remember just saying to them, it was one of those moments where it's like, how do you prepare for a question like, I was like, I don't know, Jesus, take the wheel, like, and just sort of see what comes out. And in that moment, it was just, look, like I was the person that with poor mental health got asked to leave university because of poor academic performance. And if just 3 years later, through meditation and mindfulness, if someone could graduate top of university, that's quite an ode to mental health, right? Like in terms of what's possible. And so I think they agreed. And so that was, touch wood, the blessing that I got afforded that award. And that's the spirit in which I share that story so that people can sort of see that, like, bottom of the cohort, top of the cohort. And the only thing that's shifted is awareness and mental health. Now, the other thing is, once I've graduated from that space with such an illustrious award, I pretty much had my pick of the litter when it comes to jobs, when it came to the field that I was in. And I remember like getting this incredible job, getting paid very handsomely, and by all means had made it. And I remember going the first day to my job and feeling like something's wrong, something's up. This doesn't feel like where I'm meant to be. Like I feel like the people I'm around, a lot of the work I had put into myself up until that point, I felt like the people that were around me were not supportive of all of that work. And what I meant by that was I wasn't surrounded by positive role models. A lot of the stuff I had to unravel to get out of depression, I was seeing exhibited in the leaders in the organization. I was like, dang it. But then part of me was like, you know what, maybe we'll be the change we wish to see in the world. That's still my thing on Facebook. Like, it's been like that for like 15 years. It's like, be the change you wish to see in the world. I love that Mahatma Gandhi quote. It's the essence of the inspired evolution. And so that to sort of say, for 7 years, I toiled and, felt like I was going to change the organization from the inside out. And the only way I can really describe it is I felt, I don't know, I imagine some of the people, I felt like I was the existential cat that was being rubbed the wrong way. But it was really painful. It was a second sort of foray into, I can't say it was depression because it wasn't what I had the first time, and I know what depression feels like, but it was extremely depressing. And I think the only reason I didn't slip into depression because I had a practice of meditation and mindfulness, but it was a really, and again, back to that, like it was a depressing time. I felt very suppressed. And the irony being, looking from the outside in, everybody would say, you've made it. Like, what a great opportunity. It's like, oh man, who do I turn to describe that this really doesn't feel like what you're thinking it feels like? It was just this real odd time of being contracted through all of that. Now, the metaphor I give, which is a bit denser, but it does really speak to how I felt, was some of the people tuning into your podcast. And for those of you that aren't movie buffs, pardon me for just a sec, but for those of you, my favorite movie is The Matrix. It's right up there. I absolutely love that movie. And some will argue it's a documentary, but nonetheless. In The Matrix, there's this part where Morpheus takes Neo back to baseline reality as to what's happening. So he takes it to the year, I think it's like the year 3000 or something instead of the year 2000. And he goes, hey, this is how the world actually is right now. Everyone's been plugged into the Matrix and watching like a version of the year 2000 playing out, but we're actually in the year 3000. Takes him to Machine City. And they're looking at what looks like New York City, but it's like the sky is scorched and like it's just covered in like debris, and it's all very mechanical looking version of New York. And Morpheus goes, believe it or not, it was the humans that scorched the sky when the war with the machines started. And Neo goes, what was the thinking behind that? And then Morpheus goes, well, ultimately the idea was if we didn't have the greatest power of energy for this earth is the sun, like the Radiate Wellness is the sun, right? And if the humans thought that if they were to block out the sun, the machines would have no energy source. And so that would atrophy the muscle. The machines would then die off. And then Morpheus looks over to this field, right? But the machines in their infinite wisdom discovered that human beings were a great source of energy. And we now live in a world where human beings are no longer, like, we don't procreate. We're just grown and harvested for our energy. And you just look over and there's these fields and fields and fields of red pods in this ambiotic fluid where human beings are growing and they're plugged into the matrix thinking that they're living a life, but they're actually just in this field giving the energy to the machine. Now, that's quite a harrowing sort of like, but that's honestly how it felt. Like, it was a lot of being in the wrong place, feeling like I was just giving my energy up to something. These quotes would sit with me for way too long. This idea that here I am giving my all, 6 to 6 p.m., 6 days of the week. It was an intense job. I think most jobs 9 to 5. I joke when I share from stage, it's like most jobs are 9 to 5, 5 days of the week. I don't think I would have had such an existential crisis if I wasn't putting in the amount of hours that I was. I'm just having my midlife crisis earlier because I'm putting in all the hours up front. But yeah, that to sort of say things like, oh, this entire organization would, if something happened to me 2 weeks from now, I'd be substituted out and replaced in, and someone else would be here filling the role, and the work would go on. No one would really care. And yet here I am giving so much myself. It felt so dehumanized. Now I look back now and I recognize that that job was an amazing job. It just wasn't the job for me. I wasn't living in alignment to me. Right? We can talk more about how that all started to unravel. But the transformation was ultimately to recognize that this wasn't in alignment with my values. And now I can say that now really cleanly, really clearly. Back then, I didn't know what values were. I was just going through an existential crisis. And that was the nature of the transformation, is being in the wrong place, feeling displaced, not knowing what to do about it, feeling suppressed, and ergo feeling that depressive sort of state, and going, what do I do with my life? Like, how do I get out of this? Like, I've created this. It's everything people told me it was going to be, and it's nothing like what it's meant to be. What is going on here? How do I get out? So that was the nature of what I had transformed from. I'll pause there and let you fill in on that.
No, this is perfect. This is perfect because I love how you're breaking down your thought patterns and how this actually all unfolded and came about. So, having been in that kind of existential burnout, and I'm just going to call it that because that sounds like what it was, it's hard to get yourself out of it. And the universe will often have a way of kicking you out of the nest when you're not where you're supposed to be, after they've been telling you through depression, telling you through body aches, telling you through illness, telling you through dis-ease that you're not in the right place. So how do we finally listen? I don't want to take too much of your time, but I would like to ask you a few simple favors. First of all, please rate, review, and share this podcast wherever you're listening. You know, it sounds like a simple little thing, and it is, but it has a huge impact for us because it helps other people find us in the podcasting algorithms. I don't know how it works, but I do know that it helps a lot. Next, if you would subscribe or follow wherever you're listening, whether that's YouTube or Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Pandora, Spotify, wherever you're listening, just hit subscribe or follow, and that helps you and it helps us. It helps you because then you receive notifications when we have a new episode that's out. It helps us because, again, algorithm magic, I don't know what happens, but it helps. And then finally, you can support our podcast in a tangible way by going to radiatewellnesscommunity.com/podcast and then click on support the show. Now, we have a new feature too. We are now on Patreon. You can find us on Patreon. You can also find the link to Patreon when you go to radiatewellnesscommunity.com/podcast. So on Patreon, for $3 a month or $5 a month, you can support your metaphysical and spiritual growth. You can learn about upcoming guests, and you can get early and ad-free versions of the shows. So please support us. This podcast is free for you to listen, but we have costs, and quite frankly, they come out of my pocket. So if you like this content, if you get a lot out of it, please see what you can do to give back. Thank you so much.
I love how you articulated that. I find myself saying this, and I'm not as eloquent as you as times, because I find myself saying to people, stress is an amazing gift in many ways. There is a barometer of stress, like there is a healthy amount of stress, but then also there's like a toxic amount of stress. But generally, stress and dis-ease, as you described it, which I think is way more eloquent, is a recalibration tool. It's an existentially, it's letting you know that you're out of alignment. Like the stress in your system is a free life coach. You've got a free life coach in your system called stress. And that's literally how I look at it. I'm like,
it's your check engine light.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, listen. And most of us are like, no, just another coffee and I'll be right. And it's like, dude, stop. Just nervous system. stop. And it's like, no. And I'm talking to myself from way back then. I was like, if I could just offer, there's so much I would offer that guy. But how do we come into alignment? The first thing is to really pay attention, but the awareness is key. But I was aware. And that's why I share so much the story, because I was carrying this awareness from having recovered from depression in the first instance with so much meditation and mindfulness, my morning practice, my evening practice, it's all there. And so the key thing that happened for me was the pressure, like you described, the stress just got so much. And now I look back at it and I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful because everything that you see today, me coaching, podcasting, public speaking, is, I guess, always the life touch wood that I was supporting in, like, inspiring people and helping them evolve. Inspired Evolution is always what I was meant to do, right? And that was the birthplace of the Inspired Evolution. If it wasn't as dark and challenging as that was, the gift of the Inspired Evolution would never have been born. And I see that in, and I don't want to call myself a hero, but we're all living out some version of the hero's journey, right? And we can talk about astrologically why, but nonetheless, we're all living out this version of the hero's journey. And that was my hero's journey. Like, I had to go into that dark night of the soul and face that dragon of, like, this is what it feels like when you're not in alignment, and come back with this, like, hey, the sword of alignment is epic. Get yourself aligned. Now, it didn't feel like, oh yeah, I was aligning to my values. I've just gotten clearer and clearer over the last 7 years as to what's happened. And now being able to, like, having supported, speaking to audiences, thousands plus, and then having coached 350 people deeply in one-on-one year-long journeys, just seeing the potency of understanding what alignment looks like. So the key thing in there for me, I started on the podcast actually for me. And I started growing the podcast and it just felt amazing. Even though I was still doing the work, midway towards the end, the podcast began. And it was so profound because, just to let the cat out of the bag, my values are connection, contribution, and celebration. And I'm noticing I can't say them without smiling either. But anyway, connection, contribution, and celebration. And so if we look back just really quickly at the work I was doing, right, building high-rise towers, residential towers for 40, 50 stories plus here in Melbourne, it's a great job, yeah? And was there much connection? And it was like, I'm not really connected to the work. I'm not really connected to the people. There's not a lot of connection. Is there contribution? It was like, well, my parents immigrated to Australia from India, and immigrant families do live in apartment towers and they generally move here. So there is some level of contribution to providing people homes. Is it really the contribution I want to have? No, but there is some, maybe half, let's say half a contribution. Celebration? No, there was none of that really, right? It was much more, it was very grindy as a vibe. Now, you look at podcasting, so this thing that sort of popped up and emerged, and we can talk more about where that came from, but the podcast, how it emerged was like, okay, do I get to connect? Absolutely. There's so much connection. I'm connecting to you here, Christy, today. We're connecting to you that's listening into this podcast, and you could be on anywhere in the world listening to it. There's so much connection in there. Contribution, hopefully this is serving you a little bit. And then there's a celebration. As you can probably tell, we're here celebrating life and the possibilities and the explorations, right? And then that then tumbled into coaching, connect, contribute, celebrate. That's all in there. Public speaking, connect, contribute, celebrate. That's all in there. So the thing to sort of say was this podcast immersion, I was still working really hard. I was toiling away, but I was doing more. You mentioned the word burnout. And ironically, and I see this a lot, yes, I was existentially burning out to some degree, but I took on more. I started a second venture. I started a podcast, which was a passion project. And you would sort of say if you're burning out, you wouldn't have the energy to do that. But actually that made this tolerable because I was finding myself, and there was so much, and I'm going to just call it joie de vivre at this particular juncture in the conversation, coming from that exercise. It wasn't successful as a podcast. I just started. I think it was 15 episodes before I left, but did 15, 20 episodes. But there was so much energy that was coming to me from this space that it was just, wow, this is what it feels like to be in flow in the conversations. And that's the name of the book I'm putting together. We're calling it meta flow, like flow, like when your life is in flow and in alignment. So that's why it's called meta flow. But that's what I felt. I felt meta flow. I was like, oh my God, the stars are aligning finally. And that's what alignment really felt like. So in there, the key things that needed to happen is, I remember clearly this distinct moment that was probably when you're hitting rock bottom. I sort of boom, hit the bottom. There was two very big moments for me. And one of them was I was sitting at work and having my lunch. And my lunch was an acai bowl. So for those that don't know construction, you think about average construction work. Imagine all of us sitting on a brick wall and there's like a gentleman eating a pie. There's a gentleman having a sandwich. there's a gentleman having a sausage roll. There's a gentleman with takeaway from last night. And there's Mr. Acai bowl with like grains and pumpkin seeds. It's like, which one of these is not like the others? So you could kind of like touch wood, almost argue the writing's already on the wall. But nonetheless, I'm eating this acai bowl and I had this moment of like epiphany, which I still call it divine intervention. I don't know what was going on, but I had this moment of like, Google the word courage. And I was like, what? And so I've Googled the word courage and I'm staring at the definition of courage and I'm having a full-blown epiphany. And I'm like, oh, courage is not having fear, which is what I thought. I thought courage and fearlessness were the exact same thing for the longest time. Maybe I watched too many Braveheart movies growing up, but I was just like, I thought if you were courageous, you were fearless. And I'm reading the definition of courage.
I'm looking at it too now. You inspired me to look it up. Yeah.
Yeah, look it up. It goes, courage, well, effectively is not having fear. Courage is absolutely having fear and taking action in the face of that fear, despite that fear, towards that fear. And I was like, oh, holy fuck. Oh, sorry, pardon me. Holy fuck. But courage is a skill. Fearlessness sounds like something you just got or you don't got. But courage is a skill. It's something you can develop. And actually, fear is a prerequisite for courage. Like if there's no fear, you don't have the opportunity to be courageous. Right. And as soon as that started to precipitate in my awareness, that was like the scaffolding, and the thing that just like needed to drop into that space that was being scaffolded around was, okay, what is my biggest fear? And my biggest fear was, I call it white picket fence lane, right? Is my whole life I'd been gearing towards study well, get good at school, then go to high school, get good grades, go to university, get good grades, go to get a job. Once you get a job, find someone to marry, have some kids, buy a nice house, buy a nice car, in some order. And then eventually when you're 65, here in Australia is the retirement age, you can then retire and enjoy your life and do the things that you love. And hopefully bungee jumping isn't one of those things that you love, because ouch. Right? And so that's what I call white picket fence lane, because you're told to like the house, the car and the family and all the kids and all this sort of stuff. And my awareness immediately right after, I was like, courage. Whoa, you need fear. Whoa. And I'd always kind of wanted to identify someone that was courageous. And I was like, my biggest fear, it was like the next thought. And I was like, what is my biggest fear? Oh, it's like what's going on out here. And it was like, oh, no, we're not allowed to think about that. Like, this is your opportunity. This is your job. This is the work you do in the world. You work so hard to get here. And it's like, yeah, but that's my biggest fear. What's going on out here? There are entrepreneurs, creatives, coaches living life on their own terms. Sure, it's risky, but they're out there doing it. How do they do that? And so that was this moment where it was like, oh, I do identify as someone that wants to be courageous. I'm not going to say identify as courageous, but someone that wants to be courageous. Maybe it's a masculine quality. I don't know. I think anybody can embody it. But for me, it was like, oh, something's shifting. That moment of awareness really shifted. So I still look at it, touch wood, as a moment of divine intervention, but I'm sharing it with anyone that needs to hear it right now. This is your moment. What is your courage when, now that you know that it's a skill, what are you being called to recognize that? What's your biggest fear? What do you need to step into and out of? And so even having had that, and the reason I'm taking my time responding to your question is because I dare not say, oh yeah, there was just this one moment and I transformed and I was set to go. Oh man, I wish. It was 7 years in the making. And then there was like the last year of it was harrowing. It had to get painful for me to really feel the compression. It was probably 4 months later, I went away to Costa Rica for a 2-week holiday with basically a handpan and an exercise to build out my life's vision. And I built out my life's vision. And for those that want to figure out what that exercise was, inspiredevolution.com/vision. I've got that process as a free giveaway. You guys can tune into that. It takes a bit of work to figure out your vision. And there are many processes to do that, but inspiredevolution.com/vision. And you can build out your vision the way I did it in that process. So you look at 12 different areas of your life. You start off pretty straightforward. It's like, hey, my health, my emotions, and you get through it a little bit. And then eventually, I think the category 9 or category 10 is your career, and then your finances, and then you look at your career. And I remember it was a beautiful 2 weeks for me, because I would just work on one category of my life, look at where it's at right now, then build a vision around it, look at what the mindsets I'm currently been embodying, what mindsets I need to embody, okay, what action steps need to be taken in that area of my life. And just tackling one a day took me 40 odd minutes to just kind of do it at a very relaxed pace in Costa Rica by the beach, beautiful setting. And then I'd go surfing and then I'd come back, play some handpan, eat some really nice food. It was an amazing little 2 weeks. And there was this moment where I just did the career one on day 10, let's say. I've just realized, looking at my life as 12 different dimensions, because so many of us place so much prevalence on our career that it's just like, career is everything. The work we do in the world is everything. It's like the one be all and end all that feeds everything else because it provides money and finances, and that feeds everything. And I was looking at my life as my physical health, my mental health, my emotional health, my friendships, my partnerships, the parent I wanted to become. You look at so many other dimensions that you realize career is just one dimension. And as soon as I did the exercise, I realized all my other, let's call them vials of sand, were low because I'd given so much, like they were a 3 out of 10, let's say. But career was at like 8 by mainstream standards. Was it fulfilling? No, but by mainstream standards, and finance was high. Finance was like an 8 and career and finance were high. But did it mean something to me? Not really. So I had this revelation around doing the career space, another epiphany, which was if I was just to give myself permission to allow my career to change, my finances would come bucketing down, sure, but everything else would rise. I'm sure I'd have more time for my friends, I'd have more time for my family, and it was just like, and it was so clear that these 2 vials were holding all the other vials back. And so I'm having this visceral awareness and I'm like, shit, I'm sorry again. Shit, I think I need to quit my job. And in that moment, I've walked out. I'm living at a surf hotel and I've walked out and I've just sat down in the lobby outside of my room and I've just kind of gone, whoa, I'm sitting in this common area. And this guy comes and sits down opposite me and he goes, hey, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. He didn't sound like that. He was American, but nonetheless. And I was like, yeah, look, I'm just having a bit of a moment. I just been doing this exercise on figuring out my life and I think I'm going to quit my job. And he turns around and goes, oh, that's excellent. and I was like, what? I'm not sure I'm ready for that. And I'm like, why is it so excellent? Why would you say that? And he goes, oh, I'm a structural engineer and I've just quit my job to go teach English in China. And I'm like, what? I'm a structural engineer and I'm having this existential crisis. And you've just what? And he goes, yeah, I got an email randomly. It said educate people English in China opportunity. And I was hating what I was doing in engineering. It was just so monotonous and boring. And I'm off and I don't really know what's going to happen. I'm just on my way. I'm just going through Costa Rica as like 2 weeks of a hurrah before I sort of go into my next job in China. I've never been to China before. You've been to China? And I was like, no. And I was, if there was ever a sign, and we just kept talking and talking and talking about, you know, his mindset, how he embraced the change, what was going on. I was like, I believe he was an angel. I still, part of me sometimes wonders, was he real? Anyway, but he was, right? And I've got his detail. Anyway, so it was really profound. That was a massive moment for me to go through the exercise of uncovering what my vision for my life really looks like and recognize that my career doesn't look like what I want it to, but by everybody's standards, it's great. But then, yeah, ultimately kind of going, oh, this is not working for me. And then having that person sort of appear at the right time and going, knowing enough about synchronicity that this was a sign, touch wood, to take action in that space. So those were the 2 really big moments. But again, it was a lot of stuff going on along the way. And ultimately, when I set up the podcast, I was really grateful that it was in alignment to my values. The first time I approached values, I had to understand the values of the podcast, the values of what the business that I was, not really business, a podcast, but building a business, building a podcast, very similar exercises. In one thing, you sell products and services, and another thing, you're basically salesmaning ideas, you're sharing ideas. And so you had to get clear on the values of the business, values of the podcast. And that was like the first time I ever got really clear on the values of the podcast. And I was like, I wonder what my values are. And then as I started to get clear on that exercise, my God, that's the heart of everything. My existential angst, like, could have been completely resolved had I known that what my values were, like, from the outset. Those 7 years. Oh my God, like I would have just found something completely different. I would have just done something that involved more connection, contribution, and celebration from the outset.
Amazing. So why did you decide to start off with a podcast rather than, I don't know, a course or a book or something like that?
It's a great question. I had actually always felt, and sometimes you just have a felt sense, and one of my deepest fascinations in and around the space of spirituality is this word called knowing. So I think we all have intuition, and some of us are aware of it. We dial in, but actually it's ever present. But I've asked this question on my podcast a few times of a few guests, and I just am fascinated by this knowing. So there's intuition seems to be in your heart, it seems to be in your mind, but there's this knowing that's like all the way into your bones. It's in your marrow. There are certain things that you just know, right? And it was just this really interesting space to be that I knew I wasn't in the right place. There was just this knowing, but the podcast wasn't intuitive. So how that actually came about was, interestingly, my wife was having a similar existential crisis at the time. It was all centered around, we were both going through Saturn's return, right? So that also speaks a lot to like Saturn, chariot, sun, purpose, existential crisis around purpose, of course, right? So we're both going through. So her way of dealing with it was, because she's a dentist by qualification, she's, there's got to be more to life than filling holes in people's teeth. Like waking up every day, going staring at someone's mouth and just plugging holes in people's teeth. I'm like, well, when you put it that way, probably, like, you know.
We need to have our holes filled in our teeth, but yeah, there's got to be more to life.
There's got to be more to life, right? Than spending. And the other thing that was rubbing me up the wrong way, going back to before, was potentially, well, not potentially, you're trading the best hours of the day of the best years of your life. What the actual, you know? So that was kind of the vibe she was sort of communicating to me. And she was, look, I think I need to take a break. And I was like, you should take a break. And she was like, I think I want to go traveling. And I was like, you should go traveling. And she was like, no, I think I want to go one-way ticket style traveling and just explore the world. And she brought the idea to her family, and the family said, look, if Amrit's okay with it, I was just a boyfriend at the time, not a husband, but she was like, if Amrit's okay with it, it's fine with it by us. And I think they said that thinking that I was the one that would have reservations about it. Because in a mainstream kind of context of a relationship, it was, oh yeah, hun, come on, be realistic. And she came to me and I was just like, dude, that sounds amazing. You should go. And people have asked me, like, what inspired you to kind of let her go? It was like this weird let her, like, come on, we're like two empowered beings in a relationship. There's no letting her. But anyway, to let her go, just to sort of feed that story a little bit. And just the awareness, touch wood, if someone's not whole and they have a knowing of what they need to go do to be whole, just from a selfish place as her partner, you want them to be whole because they're your other half. So I was, go on, giddy up, get out of here, go do your thing. And I remember at time, even especially at workplaces, gives you an insight. Workplace was an interesting place for me, but nonetheless, so at lunch, I'd be sitting there eating my lunch and people would be like, so your girlfriend's in Brazil on a beach at the moment? And I was like, yeah. And they're like, you know, Brazilian men are like pretty promiscuous. And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, you're not worried? Nah. and I can see their face is kind of like, what the fuck is wrong with you? and I was just like, she's out there doing her thing. She needs to find herself. If it's meant to be, she's going to come back. If it's not meant to be, she got what she was meant to get out of it. It's all good, touch wood. And so she went away. That to sort of say, then before she went away, me was like, hey, let's take some time. You're going to go to all these places. What are some of the more dangerous places you think you want to visit? Can I come with you to those places, right? I'm still kind of a little bit old school. That chivalry's not dead in my heart. I know some women are like, oh my God, we don't need you. Yeah, totally get it. But chivalry's not dead in my ecosystem. So in that, I was like, what are the more dangerous places you want to go? So I went to Africa on safari for her. But we had all these experiences. So there was about 6-7 different countries that she highlighted that I was like, some of those, I think having a bloke around might be a little bit easier. And so we went and did this amazing 6-7 week travel. And the last place we landed was Guatemala, in this beautiful place called Lake Atilan. And we're there, and because you said, why a podcast? So we're sitting in Lake Atilan, and it was New Year's Eve. And touch wood, I'm getting goosebumps as I share this with you. I'm sitting on this jetty, this dock that sort of is into the water. And so Lake Atilan is this really special place because it used to be in like a mountain. And over time, it's eroded through fire and eruption. And now it's a lake. So it's a place of transformation because the fire has eaten up and we're now left with a lake. So fire has then transmuted into water. So it's this really profound place for them. And so we're sitting on this lake and it's New Year's Eve and the clock's about to tick over. And I do something that I've never really done. And it's a bit cheesy, but nonetheless, I was like, I look over at my partner and I'm like, hey, I'm going to set a New Year's resolution. She's like, really? She was like a little bit cringe. She was like, really? Touch wood. And I was like, yeah. because we're sitting here on the edge of the jetty and beautiful, it's warm out, it's temperate, and there's just the lake's beautiful, beautiful night. And I shit you not, I'm seeing more shooting stars in this one moment than I've ever seen in my whole life put together. And I'm just like, what? This is, whoa. And I'm like, yeah. And she goes, what's your resolution? More like an intention to do more of what I love. And she goes, wow, that's actually really beautiful. And so that was this intention that dropped in for that year. After that, we parted ways. She stayed on her sabbatical, as we call it now. And I came home and back to work, back to the grind, having this existential crisis plugged back in. And one of the things that dropped in a particular moment, I was sitting at home watching a Tony Robbins video, and I was having this profound, whoa, I had an aha moment. Like, as you can tell, I'm a bit of a transformation junkie. So I'm watching this video and I have this aha moment. I'm like, oh, and I'm sitting on my desk, and my wife, and like my wife's usually chilling out on the couch, and I'd go to turn to her and she's not there. And I was like, oh, need to share, connection, contribution, celebration, right? So I was like, must share, breakthrough. And I was like,
Hey.
You're not there. And I was like, oh. And then the next thing that tumbled in was, oh, surely other people feel the same. And so there was this coalescing in that particular moment of, I want to say 20 different thoughts that just sort of boom, 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 packed on in after that initial epiphany, which I'll run you through like a handful of them. The first one was, you're the average of the 5 people you spend your time with.
Right.
The second one was, people definitely want to share, right? They want to share when things, I only, like one of my friends, he goes, you only really know you love something when you can't help but want to share it with someone. And I was like, yeah, that's so true. I saw that movie and I have to tell everybody about it. The other one was, we were in our travels to Mexico, we saw a club called Mandala. And I remember looking at that and going, that's a really sacred word. I'm not sure it's appropriate for a club to be called Mandala. But anyway, when I moved to Melbourne 6 years prior to that, I always saw myself as a bit of a socialite. And I thought I'd have Friday night cocktails at my house, but that never happened. Then I was like, oh, Friday night events at my house would still be kind of cool. Like, there's something that's been percolating for a while. And I always wanted to go to lifestyle festivals and just put up a TED talk where we could just watch a TED talk and then have a discourse in a circle or as people around what the TED talk was teaching us. Like, that was just something that was in the back of my head I never executed on. And so that's like it was like literally 20 thoughts that just went brrr, boom. And I gave myself 4 hours to say, I'm going to set up a Facebook group. I'm going to open up my house every 2 weeks to people, because I was like, monthly, a bit too much. Weekly, monthly probably seems a bit sparse. Weekly, a bit too intense. I reckon every 2 weeks seems pretty good. And we're going to shoot the shit on spirituality, philosophy, mindset, that sort of emotional intelligence and that sort of stuff. And I think the word mandala is going to drive it. It ended up being called Mandala Moment. And I was like, okay, so mandala moments. And I had also quit alcohol at the time, and I was looking to socialize outside of alcohol. Like, I could sit with anybody in a bar and have a beer, but how do you socialize without alcohol? And so for me, it was like, chai. Like, I just learned how to make really good, authentic Indian chai, because Indian is my background. So my mother-in-law taught me. So I got like chai, and we're coming for chats, and we're going to build community. Chai, chats, and community. I love alliteration, right? As you can tell, connection, contribution, celebration. Like, my 3 values have C's. Chai, chats, and community is like, this is perfect. So mandala moments, chai, chats, and community. And basically, we'll come and I'll put on a video if we don't have anything to talk about. If we've got stuff to talk about, we'll talk about stuff. But if not, we'll put on a TED talk and unpack it. And so this started to form as a bit of an idea. I was like, okay, I'm going to invite some people. I'm the average of the 5 people. So I got very conscious. I didn't just invite my friends. I invited the people I wanted to be my friends.
Oh, I love that.
I invited authors. I invited yoga teachers, people that were like, that's my yoga teacher. I'd love to see her outside of my yoga class because she's such a spiritual gangster. I don't want to say it that way, but, and I was like, I want to hang out with her. There's this lady that's written books and she's amazing, and I see her in my suburb all the time. I could invite her. And so basically went down this path of inviting these people that inspired me, right? Inspired Evolution, remember that? And so that was the birthplace of Mandala Moments. And so every 2 weeks, people started coming over to my house. I created the group. I invited these people. The first one, there was 2 people there. One was an incredible entrepreneur in his own right. And another one was, she was the author. And we had this great time. I brewed chai. We just hung out in my living room. And then the next one, I think there was only 1 person there. And we had a great time drinking chai together. And then after that, the next one was 5. And then it just continued to grow and grow and grow until at some point there was regularly 30, 40 people coming to my living room every 2 weeks. And we were just having this conversation. And I didn't realize how much of a dearth of non-alcoholic socializing spaces there were out there. Conscious, regular. And for me, it wasn't, you have to be here. It's like, hey, if you've got something better to do on a Friday, you go do it. This is just the best way I could spend a Friday. I'm just going to be here doing this. And if you guys want to come out and hang, I'm just going to be brewing chai. My door's always open. And people would just roll on in, and it was amazing. They'd bring friends. And so it just grew and grew and grew. The community ended up quite strong. And to the point where people started doing their own Mandala Moments chapters around Australia, which was actually really cool to just sort of feel.
You started something there.
Yeah. So the birthplace of the podcast was everybody in that circle started saying this to me. Not everybody, but there was key members in the community that started saying, hey, these conversations are incredibly valuable, but I can't bring my mum here, or I can't bring my dad here. Can we record parts of the conversations that we're having, because they're profound and transformative, right?
Yes.
And I wasn't steering them. I was just learning. These were people that I wanted to learn from. So I was just there. This was my school. And they were like, can you start a podcast? And I was like, look, as a container, this is a sharing container, and we only go to the depths that we go to because, let's just keep it real, like a microphone is an energetic leak in that sort of environment, right? So if I was to stick a microphone in that environment, people wouldn't be sharing as deeply as they are because they don't know who's listening on the other end of that microphone cord, right? So I was like, nah, for me, I just have this knowing that this is not right. Like, I can't chuck a microphone in here. No, like, well, maybe you can record after, like saying, hey, this is what we went through in this week's Mandala Moments. And I was like, seems like a lot of work. I'm not really into it. And so anyway, they kept pushing for a podcast for like months and months and months. And then all of a sudden a mentor appeared who was like, hey, I'm looking for a guinea pig set of people to run my new podcasting program and course on. And there was like my friends who were pushing, start a podcast. And a mentor appeared, will you do a podcast? And I, for the life of me, was like, nah, no. I listened into podcasts like Tim Ferrisson's like, I'm an expert, listen to me. And I was like, dude, I'm not an expert of anything. I'm just a perpetual student. I'm not. I shouldn't be doing a podcast, right? And because this was like 7 years ago, right? Podcasts were very different. Now they're much more explorative and open. But all of that to sort of say, I woke up at 4 a.m. one day, and it was literally in the middle of the night. And I woke up and I remember kind of going, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? Someone's going to teach me how to set up a podcast. It was very expensive for a course. I look back, but it was, $10,000. And I was like, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? I'm going to spend $10,000. I'm going to learn how to do a podcast, and I'm going to at least have a skill. And my friends are pushing me, and this mentor's appeared. Like, the universe is kind of making this happen. I'm just in the way. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, you know what? Let's get me out of the way and just allow it to happen. So I woke up, gave my credit card details, invested in this course. Didn't tell my wife about the 10 grand in it. She was my girlfriend by then, but nonetheless, it was a massive leap of faith, right? But it had to be, and I recognized it had to be 4 a.m. when like all my like left brain logic was kind of shut down. It was an inspired moment. And that was the birthplace of the podcast. Went through the 8 weeks program. The Inspired Evolution was born. I was inspired to evolve out of the corporate environment into living a life in alignment to my spiritual purpose. And I wasn't sure how to get there. So I was going to interview people such as yourself, incredible people living life on their own terms every week. And these people inspired me. And then I was hoping that I would evolve into a similar space myself. And that was the Inspired Evolution. That was 7 years ago. It was a bit of a trippy-dippy idea, I admit, touch wood, but it's worked. I'm now podcasting, coaching and speaking myself, touch wood, and it's pretty bizarro, but the formula worked, touch wood, and that's, yeah.
Wow. And so the Inspired Evolution podcast, that's on all of the platforms, isn't it? Like anywhere you would find podcasts.
Yeah, absolutely. So we go everywhere. SoundCloud, Spotify, Apple, iTunes. I have found myself saying that YouTube is the home of the Inspired Evolution podcast. It just feels we're able to comment. People are commenting to me. I'm commenting back to them. There are comment threads that are like 15, 20, 25 messages long sometimes. We're exploring. There's an idea that was shared in the video, and then we're like talking about it back and forth. And it's just like, just the heartiness of that. It really feels like people are home experiencing the podcast, but there's a large contingent of the audience that listens on Spotify and Apple iTunes, which is everywhere else you listen to podcasts. Yeah, right. It's available everywhere, but I invite people to subscribe on YouTube.
Oh, good. And then the website for that is inspiredevolution.com. But I want to also talk about your website to talk about, just maybe mention real briefly some things that you offer on your website, the coaching, the courses, Success Stories podcast, just real briefly, kind of an overview.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so ultimately there's the work that the Inspired Evolution does, which is a podcast, which is my sort of offering to the world. And then if I just found initially what started happening, and this is all very organic, how it's happened. Mandala Moments gave birth to the Inspired Evolution. The Inspired Evolution podcast gave birth to some of my audience members reached out and said, hey, will you coach me? And I was like, on what? And they're like, just have the conversations you're having with these guests, with me. I think there's going to be value there. Subsequently, after that, I went away and got certified. I had this amazing opportunity to get certified by Eckhart Tolle, working with him really deeply and intimately, Mindvalley, and then the Gene Keys and Heart Math. So after having started as a coach, I then went and got certified. And that's a lot of the work I do now. And for the longest time, it's been just helping people live in alignment to their spirit's purpose. You have your soul. There's a reason it was incarnated and put here. And your personality is oftentimes trying to do things that it's not in alignment to that. And there's a lot of dis-ease. There's a lot of existential angst in there. So supporting people on that path, man, that's where the coaching has been for the last 7 years. And it's been beautiful just watching the transformations. Like I said, there's been 350 plus deep one-on-one transformations that we've gone through during that time. It is such a blessing to be of support to people in that way. And yeah, that's at the heart of it. That's the one-to-one coaching. And generally what you find is there's a lot going on with the podcast. And I find most people that have podcasts that grow this way, they generally start to steer out of one-to-one coaching because it's not time efficient. It's not, but it is, because I'm just a trippy dippy person that loves going deep. It's connection, right? Connection, contribution, celebration. In a group container, you do go deep with each other. But when it's one-to-one and it's intimate, your whole self is given permission to show up. And it doesn't care about who's listening. What is, again, the microphone thing, right? There's no leaks. And it's like, woo. And so I'm just enamored by that space, have been for 7 years, despite there being opportunities to, and we do have some group coaching offerings, but I invite everybody to check out one-to-one coaching with myself if they're open to go further. And that's amrit.coach is the website. In order to go further, you just book in a free 30-minute call with me and we can just touch base and sort of see where you're at and see if I can be of service. Sometimes just the call is enough, but sometimes a journey is inviting you, and that's amrit.coach/life for the call, LIFE.
Now you have a course, a free course, like a mastermind, right?
Yeah. So for those people that, okay, Amrit, you talked a lot about your values. It's like, how do I get clear on mine? 20 minutes from now, you could be just as clear on your values as I am on mine. And I know that's like, what? And it's like, yeah, 20 minutes. You've listened to this podcast for an hour. You can totally, like, another 20 minutes, touch wood, and you could be as clear on your values as I am. And that is literally inspiredevolution.com/values. I've got a masterclass there, or amrit.coach/values. Either or, both will take you to the same place. And you can download the masterclass to then just get clear on this exercise on how to discover your values. And from there, you'll know. It's like, hey, I'm freedom, growth, and joy. Those might be your makeup. Those might be your 3 words. And you're like, oh, does my job bring me this? Do my relationships bring me this? You can start having a look and really start to audit things and get really clear on what your direction is. And if you need any support, just reach out. I'm pretty open.
You really are very, very approachable. So I appreciate that. And I love being able to talk with you about, I'm having some hardware issues, trying to get the baby down. And, like, I've got an appointment, it's going extra long. So it's just a series of conversations is what life is. Right? So I would encourage anybody to reach out to you because you're very approachable, very personable, and have so much information and dedication to share with everybody. So again, that is Inspired Evolution is the podcast. And then the website is amrit.coach, and just connect that way. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh my God, Christy, it is such a pleasure again, like I said at the beginning, to be here. Like, your questions, the space you hold, just really, really grateful. Thank you so much it's always weird being the podcaster, being podcasted. A little bit of I can talk, but yeah, thank you so much for giving me the space to share. Really appreciate it. Hopefully this serves and helps people to the nth degree. And if there's anything else I can further do, please just let me know. Thank you so much, Christy, for this incredible opportunity. And thank you to everybody that's tuning in.
Yeah. Don't know what to watch next? Decisions. Well, we've got some suggestions. You can click this little video here and watch that. It's something that we think you're going to like. If you like the last one, you're going to like that one too. You can also click on the subscribe button. And if you do that, then you'll get notifications whenever we have a new video up. Win-win, right?